Hello, everyone, and welcome back. Sorry about the technical difficulties a moment ago. Our sound system wasn't working. So now we are back and we are live, and everything should be good going forward. So as I was saying a moment ago, unfortunately you couldn't hear me, I was welcoming you to the presentation of our findings of our Healthy Communities Survey. And before we begin, we want to first introduce ourselves and the organization that we're a part of. We want to acknowledge the land on which we're speaking and specifically Indigenous people's title to the land. And we will also want to make a brief statement on the connections between abolition and anti-colonial struggles. So my name is Leon Laidlaw. I am a white settler, queer and trans man. I am born on and currently residing on Treaty 1 territory, Winnipeg. I am a contract instructor with the University of Winnipeg, a PhD candidate at Carleton University. I work for the national nonprofit Justice Trans, and I am a captain of the Mama Bear Clan Patrol, which runs out of the North Point Douglas Women's Center. Today, I'm speaking to you with my co-presenter, Trixie, and I would love for Trixie to take a moment to introduce herself as well.
Hi folks, my name is Trixie Maybituan. I use she, her pronouns. I am an immigrant and Filipino woman in Treaty 1 territory.
Great, thank you so much, Trixie. So I'm going to start us off in this presentation today, and only later I will pass it to Trixie, who's going to take us through our survey and survey findings. So I want to start today with a land acknowledgement. So we are speaking today as members of the Winnipeg Police Cause Harm, a local abolitionist group organized and operated in Winnipeg on Treaty 1 territory. Treaty 1 is home of the Métis Nation and the unceded territories of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Oji-Cree, Dakota, and Dene peoples. Like all member treaties, the spirit and intent of Treaty 1 has been consistently ignored and undermined by settler colonial governments through land theft, family separation, mass incarceration, and much more. We also wish to extend our acknowledgement of Indigenous title to the land to acknowledge the source of our water from Treaty 3 territory, and specifically Shoal Lake 40 First Nation, and the source of our power from Treaty 5. As an abolitionist group, we recognize the central role that law, policing, and prisons have played in genocide, assimilation, and land theft. The law has always worked to displace and control Indigenous peoples, and it has always allowed for and justified genocide and land theft. We approach the abolition of police and prisons as a moment of solidarity with Indigenous struggles for freedom. The Winnipeg Police Cause Harm is a community-centered police abolitionist group committed to defunding the Winnipeg Police Service and reallocating resources to life-sustaining services. WPCH was founded in September 2019 following several killings by the WPS of Indigenous and Black people, including Chad Williams, Machar Madhu, Sean Thompson, and Randy Cochran. Since then, WPCH has worked to increase public awareness and engagement with abolition, a movement built out of the intellectual brilliance and radical traditions of Black and Indigenous organizers, activists, and scholars. WPCH approaches abolition in solidarity with struggles for Black liberation and Indigenous self-determination. We do not advocate for police reform, but for the defunding and abolition of the police and the reallocation of their funds to sustainable community-led alternatives. The organization's work includes postering and tabling, helping to organize rallies, presenting to the Winnipeg Police Board and to other public meetings, providing support to families of loved ones who have been harmed by police, carrying out targeted campaigns like we did for the police helicopter, collaborating with community organizations, writing blog posts and op-eds, and maintaining an active role on social media. Our presentation today is going to proceed as follows. First, we are going to offer a brief overview of the City of Winnipeg survey, where we present the problems with the city survey. Specifically, we're going to explain how it prevented a fair public engagement on the topic of police funding and how it worked to silence recent calls from our local communities to defund the police. Afterwards, we move into a discussion of how WPCH responded by creating our own Healthy Communities survey. We overview our methods for data collection and explain how our survey can better reflect the diversity of opinions of Winnipeggers than what the city allowed for. Finally, we present our survey findings and explain how Winnipeggers truly felt about the police budget and where they wanted to see their money allocated instead of policing. We conclude this presentation with a discussion of the importance of defunding the police and invite you to our upcoming actions. The City of Winnipeg spends the highest percentage of its budget on policing of any major city in Canada. In 2021, the Winnipeg Police blew over $300 million, mostly on the six-figure salaries and cushy benefits enjoyed by its officers. For instance, Police Chief Danny Smythe makes over $270,000 a year, far more than any other city employee, including the mayor. In January of 2022, the City of Winnipeg conducted a highly biased survey regarding proposed funding models for the Winnipeg Police Service under the guise of public engagement. The survey was developed to reaffirm the city's intentions to increase the police budget. In a City News interview, University of Regina professor Dr. Mark Spooner critiqued the methodological basis of the City of Winnipeg survey, affirming the fact that it is indeed skewed towards the increase of police funding. It is our position that any and all options to reduce or to cut police funding was excluded as a tactic to silence the well-documented community demands to defund the WPS and to reallocate this enormous budget to life-sustaining services that actually will help create healthy and safe conditions in our city. This survey, which cost our city over $150,000, does not constitute a fair public engagement, nor does it actively or accurately reflect the needs, values, and desires of our communities. I want to now take you through the 5 proposed funding models included in the City of Winnipeg survey. First, the first model was called the status quo. This means that the Winnipeg Police would continue to make specific budget requests, and council would decide what budget it gets, alongside all other city departments. The second model was called inflation increase, meaning that the police budget would be tied to rates of inflation. The third model was called modified inflation. This would increase the police budget by following wage and benefit increases in the collective bargaining agreement in combination with inflation increases. The fourth model was called a public safety levy. This would be the same as option 3, except there would be a new levy charged of residents. And finally, the fifth model was called the share of tax revenue growth. This would increase or decrease by a set proportion of the property tax volume. When the city survey was introduced, the chair of the Winnipeg Police Board, Marcus Chambers, claimed that the Winnipeg Police Service wants to ensure that their budget does not, quote, overwhelm all of the other city services, whether that be the paramedics, community services, water and waste, and so forth. Yet, when taking the survey, there was no opportunity to demand the reduction of police funding and no opportunities to express demands for the redistribution of funds from policing to other public services. The WPS consumes over a quarter of the city's entire annual budget, and this is only set to increase. Chambers' statement was nothing more than a performative gesture, knowing that the city's survey could not and would not put a cap on police budgets. The major problem with the City of Winnipeg survey is the way in which it purposefully ignores and disregards the longstanding issues that exist in policing and silences the voices of those who are critical of police and have called attention to these issues by failing to recognize defunding as a possible and viable option moving forward. The City of Winnipeg survey was formed only to strengthen, expand, and justify policing, acting in direct opposition to the voices of our community members who are calling for defunding. Calls for defunding and abolishing the WPS have been heard for years. This is witnessed in the countless actions and protests against police violence that have taken place. This is also witnessed in the more than 120,000 signatures that Justice for Black Lives Winnipeg received in their change.org petition, which demanded the defunding of WPS, among other things. Winnipeggers' dissatisfaction with the WPS is informed by the increasing number of people who have died at the hands of the police, those who are primarily Black, Indigenous, and people of color. There are currently 6 outstanding public inquests into the death of Black, Indigenous, and men of color between 2018 and 2020 alone, namely Patrick Gagnon, Michael Baggett, Sean Thompson, Matthew Fosanov, Randy Cochran, and Vianney Chamay. WPCH has supported the victims' families' calls for separate, independent public inquests into these murders, as well as for police accountability and transparency. Unfortunately, this is part of a much longer, violent, and deadly history of policing. Between the years 2000 and 2017, there were at least 461 police killings that were recorded in Canada, and 60% of people who were killed during police encounters in Winnipeg were Indigenous. Winnipeggers' distrust of the WPS is glaring. Satisfaction rates with the WPS and crime control dropped by 14% between 2018 and 2021. Satisfaction with police response to 911 calls also dropped by 19%. The city is very well aware that Winnipeggers are increasingly critical of the Winnipeg Police Service and are demanding alternatives. A 2020 survey revealed that 1 in 3 Winnipeggers support cutting the police budget. 2 years later, now in 2022, the city of Winnipeg is still refusing to acknowledge the necessity of defunding the Winnipeg Police Service, despite their failure to protect Winnipeggers and the violence that they enact on our BIPOC communities. Many Winnipeggers have voiced their concern regarding the City of Winnipeg survey online. We collected Twitter posts to exemplify some of these concerns. The main reason for people's dissatisfaction with the survey is that there is no option for defunding the police. The City of Winnipeg disguises Model 5, the share of tax revenue growth model, as a defunding option because it supposedly will lower the police budget by $5.6 million. However, we at WPACH have argued that this option is misleading because property tax values will only increase in the future. If the city is truly committed to listening to, engaging with, and acting in the interests of Winnipeggers and their demands, why is it that all models presented by the City of Winnipeg are premised on an increase of police funding? When confronted with the biased nature of the city's survey, the police board insists on building a, quote, proper, sustainable, predictable, and depoliticized funding formula for the Winnipeg Police Service. By implying that their funding model was depoliticized, the board is trying to separate any talk of defunding from the biased models that they provided, as if an increase in police funding is somehow less political than calls for defunding. Chambers insists that budget cuts are, quote, on the table for this process, but Winnipeggers who attended city-run events on the topic were criticized as unrespectful and not civil when they acknowledged the lack of defunding options for the police budget. The police board was not open to hearing the demands for defunding. And at this point, I would like to pass it off to my co-presenter, Trixie, who is going to now walk us through the WPCH response and how we have created our own survey that is more responsive to the calls that we are hearing in our communities. Thank you, Trixie.
Thank you, Leon. So the alleged premise of a sustainable and predictable police funding model rules out the possibility of budget cuts. The city creates the impression that the only option Winnipeggers have going forward is increased funding towards Winnipeg Police Service when they deliberately excluded the funding options in their survey. So in response, Winnipeg Police Cause Harm launched its own healthy community survey via Google Forms, which ran from mid-January to early February. Our goal was to facilitate a transparent public engagement process representing real community demands regarding police funding. The Healthy Community Survey was shared on social media and similarly oriented organizations. So the survey consisted of 7 questions. The slide is an example of how the questions appeared on Google Forms. We combined questions with single and multiple options and written responses as well. We asked which city ward the responders lived in to ensure that all communities have a voice in the survey, and to also determine which wards we should further reach out to. This guarantees that everyone has a voice in the survey rather than concentrating on one area and accidentally disregarding others. And after data collection, WPCH received a total of 530 survey responses. We received responses from each city ward, with Daniel McIntyre and Fort Rouge East Fort Garry as the top wards, receiving 20% and 19.6% of the total responses, respectively. Winarski's next with 7.7% and Charleswood with 6%. The second question in the survey is standard as well. We asked whether the respondents filled out the City of Winnipeg survey prior to answering our own Healthy Community survey. 57% did not fill out the City of Winnipeg's police funding model survey, and 43% said they filled out the city survey. So on this slide, you can read some of the written responses we received from the survey. A lot of Winnipeggers are voicing the same issue with the city survey. The choices are extremely limited to a single outcome, and that is more funding for Winnipeg Police Service rather than allocating the funding to life-sustaining and community-based services in the city. Most Winnipeggers felt that they were pressured to give feedback on a one-sided and poorly designed survey. They also questioned the intentions behind it. The city argues that Winnipeggers' feedback is important to budget decisions, but by limiting the funding models to the city's desirable outcome, public feedback is rendered insignificant to the actual decision-making process. To address the lack of defunding options in the city survey, we provided a wider variety of defunding model options, ranging from a freeze to a 30% budget cut to 100%. WPCH survey respondents answered the following. So 22.6% called for a 50% cut, 21.5% called for a 30% cut, 16% called for a 10% cut, and 12.6% called for a 100% cut. So those are the top responses that we have for this question. So for those who didn't choose the 100% cut, the next question asks if people would like to see continuous budget reduction in future budgets until WPS is defunded and abolished. From the data, 12.6% called for a 100% cut to the police budget, but 70.8% would like to see budget reduction in future budgets until WPS is defunded and abolished. 15.7% said that they are not sure, and 13.6% said they don't want to see budget reductions. With a total of $320 million in the police budget, WPS must make necessary changes to reach the defunding goals we highlighted in the Healthy Community survey. We wrote down multiple options for consideration, and the top responses we have are 85% of the survey respondents are calling for Winnipeg Police Service to sell their tank purchased in 2015 for $342,800 and the robot dog purchased in 2021 for $257,000. 80% called for a stricter salary cap in contract negotiations, and 74% suggested selling the helicopter, whose yearly maintenance alone costs around $600,000. And then 68% recommended the hiring freeze. So how then should we reallocate the police funding to social services and community-based programs? One of the most important parts of our survey is asking Winnipeggers' feedback on how they want police funding to be redistributed to actual life-sustaining services in our community. The goal of defunding is reallocating the funding for harmful institutions like the police to services that can create safer conditions in Winnipeg. The top responses from the survey are 87% are calling for public housing, reallocation of funding to public housing, safe consumption sites, safe supply, harm reduction, nonviolent, and anti-carceral crisis response. And then 80% said low barrier 24/7 spaces, and then 75% said public transit. So WPCH Healthy Community Survey succeeded where the City of Winnipeg failed with their public engagement process. We recognized Winnipeggers' demands for defunding and presented the public with a broader array of defunding options, from a freeze option to a 100% budget cut. From the survey data, the majority of the respondents called for a 50% budget cut, with 70.8% wanting to see continuous budget reduction until the eventual abolition of the Winnipeg Police Service. Participants agreed that defunding WPS is possible if the city sells the 343,000 armored vehicle, the 257,000 robot dog, and the helicopter, while implementing a hiring freeze and stricter salary caps for its employees. So rather than continuing to fund administered state violence, Winnipeggers instead want to reallocate the police funding towards alternative life-sustaining and community-based services with public housing, harm reduction services, and nonviolent and anti-carceral crisis response at the top of their demands. So WPCH's Healthy Communities Survey revealed Winnipeggers' collective desires for real public safety that is rooted in community and care. If the city of Winnipeg presented actual defunding models for the police budget, they would conclude that the community is calling for defunding rather than increased funding. And now I will pass it back over to Leon to conclude the presentation.
Thank you so much, Trixie. So as we mentioned earlier, the WPS's current budget is a total of $320 million, and it is only set to increase. It is our position that the city survey was developed not with the intention of hearing the actual wants, needs, and values of our communities, but rather to justify the city's own political interest in increasing policing. This decision benefits only those in positions of power and privilege, as it consumes funding from other city services and organizations that are actually vital to the health and well-being of our collective. The city's intention to increase police funds speaks to the nature of government neglect, violence, and greed. We want to take a moment to conclude by acknowledging some of the ways that our city has failed us by increasing the police budget, and to incite a call to action to defund the WPS and to redistribute the money back into our communities. Our city funds police who forcibly remove people from bus shacks and apartment lobbies when they are trying to find warmth and safety during cold Winnipeg winters, as opposed to funding public housing. The death of our houseless kin is a direct result of government neglect. The funding of police, as opposed to mental health programs, places those who are living with mental illness vulnerable not only to arbitrary detention and incarceration, but to police violence and murder. Police response in the form of so-called wellness checks are never an effective, appropriate, or safe response to mental health crisis. The city decides to fund police to criminalize drugs and people who use them, as opposed to establishing safe consumption sites and enhancing substance abuse treatment programs. Winnipeg has responded to this public health crisis through criminalization and incarceration of drug users, as opposed to strategies premised on harm reduction and care. Policing has only intensified during this pandemic, yet police are often seen maskless while interacting with our community members, and have only responded with complacency to the dangerous convoy occupation that has terrorized our city. Each time we are met with a crisis in our city, our government responds by expanding police powers and therefore expanding police budgets. The city would rather respond to these social issues and economic issues that are in our city through criminalizing and incarcerating people, rather than providing the resources, services, and opportunities that will aid in our survival. We are taught to believe that the police are necessary to ensure safety, and that they are the only ones who can bring about justice. However, our communities recognize this as a government myth that is used to maintain inequalities. The responses we received to our Healthy Community Survey reveal Winnipeggers' beliefs that police do not enhance our safety, but that our safety is dependent on the health and well-being of our collective. Our communities demand real justice premised on an ethics of care, mutual aid, and harm reduction, as opposed to the violent and oppressive powers of policing. At this point, I'm going to thank my co-presenter Trixie for joining me today and for all her help with presenting the Healthy Community Survey and the findings today. So thank you very much, Trixie. I would also like to thank my other team members at WPCH for making this survey possible and their tireless efforts to counter police expansion. Now I am going to pass it over to my team member, James, who is going to tell us about upcoming events and how you might want to get involved.
Thanks, Leon, and thanks, Trixie. Really appreciate it, and thanks for everyone sticking with us through the slight technical difficulties. So my name is James. I'm a organizer with WPCH, and just wanted to update you about a few events beyond this, and also talk to you about what you can do if you want to get involved. So the first one coming up is this Friday. It's March 4th at 9:30 a.m. And you can attend this on Zoom or on YouTube. If you're presenting, you can use Zoom. And this is a Winnipeg Police Board meeting where ostensibly the board is meant to be providing oversight of the police, and we see it as an opportunity to intervene and present and make a case for defunding and abolition. So if you want to get involved in this in terms of presenting, I'm going to give a quick overview of what that looks like after this. But you can also just show up on the day of and watch the YouTube. We're going to be hosting a watch party as a space for the community to, exchange thoughts and discuss what's going on. So if you want to be a part of that, keep an eye out on social media for that. And then on Tuesday, March 15th, there's the International Day Against Police Brutality, which is a global day to obviously oppose police violence in our communities. So details are to come on that, but there will be a in-person action, which of course we encourage people to socially distance and wear masks and all that kind of thing. But before we let you go, just want to give a quick overview. If you are interested in presenting to the police board this Friday or at any police board meeting in the future, so firstly, why we do it is because we think it is important to remind the board, again, which is ostensibly meant to provide oversight, that there is ongoing and consistent opposition to the police in the city. They like to pretend that that's not the case. So we don't necessarily think that the police board can be convinced, but we see it as an opportunity to intervene and to make a public statement about that. Second is who can present. Literally anyone can present. It doesn't matter whether you study policing professionally or whether you just don't like police, or it can be literally anyone. And we encourage people from all walks of life and backgrounds and experiences with police to present, because it's very easy for them just to marginalize people who continually show up because they're just like, oh, that's this person again. So you can present up until 10 minutes, but in saying that, you can take as little or as much time of that as you want. If you just want to show up and say, I support defunding and abolishing the Winnipeg Police, you can do that. Or if you want to take the full 10 minutes to do a comprehensive report on the Winnipeg Police finances, you can do that as well. Following your presentation, there may be questions that the police board poses to you, which sometimes is a little bit scary, but I think the thing to remember about the questioning process is that you really don't have to answer what they're asking if you don't feel like it. If they say, how do you propose doing X, Y, or Z, you can just say, it's not my job. It's your job. You're the one who is getting paid for this. If you want to engage, you can, but it's certainly not like mandatory. And I think it's really important for us or people who are presenting, to remind the police board that we are volunteers, we're community members. We're not the ones who are getting paid six-figure salaries to figure this out. So it's we're there to raise this as a priority, but not to necessarily figure out all the ins and outs. And finally is how, if you want to do this. So you have to contact the city if you want to present. You have to contact the city by noon the day before, and you just need to say that it's something that you want to do. And there's two ways that you can do it. Conventionally, you can email the city, and it's city clerks. So that's CITYCLERKS at winnipeg.ca. Or I just found out that they also have a new online submission form on the City of Winnipeg's website, which you can just Google for. And you have to specify what item of the agenda you want to speak to. You can speak to any item that you want, but we took a look at the upcoming agenda, and some of the options are, for example, item 6 is the 2021 fourth quarter budget update. You can pick that. You don't have to speak to any specifics about it, but it's just basically to flag that you are speaking to something technically on the agenda. With that said, if they do try to stop you at any point during and say this isn't relevant to the item or whatever, you can just say, well, assuming that you're speaking in favor of defunding abolition, you can say that what I'm saying is directly related to the budget, because you as the police board and this council are electing to spend money on this. So that's basically it. Again, noon the day before, if you want to sign up. We're going to put this information on our social media as well. So if you want to check it out there. And then if you don't want to present, you can just show up at 9:30 or shortly after, because they usually start late, and watch on the YouTube. And yeah, so that's on Friday. And then once again on Tuesday, March 15th, is the International Day Against Police Brutality. So that's it. Thanks for everyone who watched. And thanks again to Leon and Trixie for presenting. And yeah, we'll keep you all posted on our social media events and everything else. So thanks so much.